2NURFM, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
It's time to have a look at all the things that are happening in the world of politics, and by goodness me, at the moment there is a truckload of things happening in that world. We're joined as always by Professor Jim Jost, our Professor of Politics. And Jim, this morning, while we're speaking, we want to be speaking about free speech.
Good morning, Mark. Yes, I mean, the issue of free speech came up over the past week and a half or so, largely around the issue of Chelsea Manning and the denial of her entry visa to Australia for her to come and be part of a speaking tour, and to be in person, that is. And the Immigration Department basically ruled that she failed the character test, which basically means that her character was deemed unsuitable for entry to Australia. The official reason around that is that she was convicted of a crime and served time in jail. She served 7 years of a 35-year sentence for handing over classified documents to WikiLeaks, some tens of thousands of documents. And after 7 years, President Obama commuted her sentence. So she was effectively released and had no more time to serve, but she retained a criminal record. And on that basis, she was at risk for the character test, and the Minister in the Immigration Department ruled that she failed that test.
I suppose that's a little bit more in depth than what we saw here earlier in the year, where a bunch of state secrets were left in a filing cabinet in an op shop in Canberra, but that's another story. Look, this idea of people failing the character test, there is a bit of a line in the sand that was drawn quite a while ago, wasn't there, from I believe the High Court in this implied right of free speech?
Yes, well, two things here I think we need to cover, Mark. The first is that technically she was not being denied the right of free speech, she was being denied entry.
But one automatically checkmates the other, doesn't it?
Well, ultimately, if she can't get into the country, she can't speak here. But that's issue aside. The issue of an implied right of free speech, the High Court basically ruled that the government cannot enact legislation that directly impinges on people's freedom of speech. Largely, it's not a personal right in the same way that the First Amendment right in the US protects individuals' rights to free speech. What it does is place a limit on the right of the government to restrict what would normally be a person's capacity for free speech. And they did this on the basis that we have a system of responsible government and representative democracy. This is part of our constitution, was read into our constitutional arrangement by the High Court, and they therefore argued that in order for that system of government to work effectively, people had to have the right of free speech. Hence, it's implied. And if a government passes legislation which impinges on that capacity, the government then has to demonstrate that the legislation is appropriate for the task that it is set out for, and that it doesn't unduly restrict people's capacity for free speech. If those two conditions don't seem to get met, then it can be ruled that they are restricting free speech, and that legislation will not be accepted.
I think the whole thing really can get messy, because even just listening to that, I think my brain actually did explode. So there's also all these further implications of what if folks that have got, I'm not going to say extreme views, but views that may not be centre, shall we say, that can potentially be considered to be drumming up hatred, and it certainly does from opposition of that free speech. And we know that all sides of the spectrum have this view too of, well, if you're not really where we're at, we really figure that the opposite end of that can be hatred. So we see that from all sides of the spectrum, don't we?
Well, in some respects, that perhaps is in the eye of the beholder or in the ear of the listener. But I think it's fair to say that we do have some capacity where a person is going to come in and deliver speeches to incite violence or incite hatred or to foment those sorts of outcomes, that there is a reasonable position that says, no, this is not permitted. If you want to come and speak, and deliver your views, provided you are not, saying X should go whatever. You're entitled to express those views, but you are not entitled to deliberately incite hatred and encourage people to acts of violence.
I think there is a line there because yes, there are instances where people would be like, we want people on our side to be angry and full on against person or group X. But on the other side of that, there are just some views that other sides get upset about, and therefore the violence is not from the people on their own side, but opposition thought to that sort of creates violence.
Well,
or stirs up a lot of...
It's complex and messy, I
think,
Mark. Yes, the price of free speech is to ensure and protect the rights of people to say things that you don't like to hear, or that go against one's own particular views or political position. Free speech means specifically that a range of views should be able to be raised and heard. At the same time, where someone stands up and says, or urges someone to go out and inflict violence on somebody, or rouses certain emotions in the full knowledge that these will result in violence against people or so forth, then they are, in a sense, acting irresponsibly, and their right of free speech is not to inform and to assist people to understand something or to convert or persuade people to their point of view. It's actually to create social discord in a way that is not constructive.
And I think, Jim, it is a very interesting line in the sand, and by line in the sand, I mean tide. It can sort of, that can be very fluid in some respects. But I think if we can at least get to a situation where, yes, we can have a whole range of views heard and expressed freely, and at least then everybody can make their own mind up intelligently about how they respond intellectually to those views, I think we'd be doing okay.
I think, Mark, part of the dimension of free speech is also that there is a responsibility on the speaker to understand the impact of their words and the way in which those words will be received. And in most cases, politicians, political speakers, so forth, they know and understand the impact of their words. And for them to plead ignorance is perhaps a little disingenuous. But the main thing is that there is a responsibility when one exercises free speech to do so with full awareness of the power of those words. And we have legislation in place which enables people who feel that they have been wronged by those things to seek some form of legal redress. And that's often where we get the arguments, Mark, coming up about, well, infringement of free speech. But it's those sorts of legislations do it mainly for the people who are powerless to be able to actually have their day in court, to be able to say, please justify what you're saying and provide the evidence for that. And because basically what you've done is attack me personally.
Jim, it's something that won't go away quietly, and it's like I said, it's a very fluid thing. So we'll keep an eye on it. Thanks for your time with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mark.
There he is, our Professor of Politics, Jim Jones, as we talk free speech this morning on 2NURFM 103.7.